All right, so chapter 9, lesson 3, final section here of North Africa, life in North Africa today. One thing we're going to see on this map is that population is kind of clustered in certain areas, whether around the mouth of the Nile River here as it empties into the Mediterranean, population over here around the coast of the Mediterranean. Water is really needed, so like the cities of Cairo, Algiers, Casablanca, those are some of the largest cities in North Africa because people need access to water. You'll see that show up here in a little bit on another slide. Just so you can read this, I'll move myself around here a little bit more. The Egyptians, Berbers, and Arabs make up the three main cultural groups in North Africa, with Arabs actually kind of being the largest section. Most people in the region are Muslim. There are some Christians. I think it says 1 in 10 people are Christians in Egypt. I think actually just a couple of years ago, there was a pretty bad bomb that went off in one of the Egyptian churches, and it made national headlines. I think it was just a couple of years ago. So there are some other faiths that are represented, but most people, really there's just a lot of ties with Southwest Asia as far as language, culture. So most people are Arab. Most people practice Islam and speak Arabic. You'll see that show up here in a little bit too. This just talks about cities, populations growing a lot. It says that even many cities don't show signs of planning, which I think kind of means there's a lot of disorganized layout of them. You don't have like a business district and then a residential district and streets running and, horizontal paths and vertical paths to make it, easy to get around. So I think it's just often very congested and very crowded. Here are some of those largest cities. So the biggest city in North Africa is Cairo at 9.3 million people. So it's big. This is like, 9 times the size of Indianapolis. That's the biggest city that we really have close by to kind of put in perspective. Algiers is 3.4 million. Casablanca, famous movie named Casablanca, by the way. So if you ever heard that city before, that may be why, which is in Morocco, 3.3 million. And then Tunis, the capital of Tunisia, is 1.1 million. So Libya has the highest rate of urbanization, but the largest cities are actually in other places. So Libya just has a lot of other heavily urban areas. Cairo's largest city, rich history that goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, right there on the Nile River. Definitely probably a connection between the old and the new. You can see this doesn't look like the desert, right? As we mentioned before, this is kind of in that area that's going to receive more rainfall. It's near the Nile. There's going to be more green, more vegetation, which is going to make more people want to live there. This talks about, I believe this is pronounced the souks, which are open air markets. And I feel like this is just kind of society outside of the United States, really outside of Europe probably has some of these. I know I've traveled a little bit in Central America, and open air markets are really big there. So, spices you can see over here on the left side. There could be rugs for sale, clothing. It's just like people wouldn't necessarily go to a Kroger or a Walmart to do their shopping. They will just do it at these open air markets. And some of it's a little bit crazy. Like there will be like entire animals just like completely dismembered, and you can buy like all parts of it. I think in our area about Saudi Arabia, we talked about my friend Anna said you could buy like all parts of the camel at the open air market. So a lot of places in the world, that's kind of a little bit more a thing that they have. We don't really have those. I mean, we guess we have farmers markets, but they really only kind of like run on the weekends. And this is kind of, I think, something that kind of runs day to day, but it may be more kind of towards the weekend and people do all their shopping there. Definitely outside of these massive cities, there's going to be smaller rural areas, villages that may only have, like 500 people. It talks about terraces can be used here to create farming and steep hillsides because Morocco would be located in the Atlas Mountains. I think oftentimes when they eat, they sit on the floor with rugs. You can see some of the things they're eating here. So they have watermelon, probably grown somewhere where there's like more moisture. Watermelons would need that. You can see that this is pita bread over here. Maybe you've had pita before. There is couscous. Couscous is kind of similar to it's made out of semolina wheat, but it's kind of similar to like quinoa. It's like smaller kind of grain like that, smaller pebbles, not thicker and bigger like rice. It's good stuff. And that's a common food. Falafel, which is taking, I believe, chickpeas, because it says dried beans here. Remember, you tried some chickpeas in class recently, and then they make falafel out of them, which are like these cakes, but not like a sweet cake, more like a bread. So that's some of the food that's eaten. Other things that they would eat are goat, lamb, beef. Remember, they do not eat pork because of Islam. And it says slaughtered according to Islamic law. So there's even ways that animals have to be prepared, ways that animals cannot be either butchered or prepare the food. Dates, almonds, olives, those types of things can be grown around the Nile. And then often this region is pretty famous for spices, especially things like cumin, cinnamon, ginger can be found in those. And then it mentions saffron. Now, I've never really had too much saffron. Saffron is it is parts of a flower, and it is actually the most expensive spice in the world. So like a jar of it would probably cost you, I don't know, I've never even bought any, but you can buy it in the store. Might cost you like $50, $60 for a little jar of it. So it's really, really expensive because it takes those flower petals, or it's a stamen off of the flower. It's part of it that they use. Saffron, they usually just use a tiny bit of that in cooking. And I was going to mention that Bloomington, I looked it up. There is a restaurant called Falafel in Falafels in Bloomington. I looked it up just a minute ago, and it said it was temporarily closed. But I know they serve a lot of more foods that we would find in North Africa or in Southwest Asia. So moving on here, art. There is traditional Islamic art. They do forbid showing animals or humans in their art. So a lot of them are just kind of like woven either fabrics where they show like a design of some kind. You'll see some more of that. Many young people are attracted to Western music and movies. And it says this has angered strict Muslims. So, and if you think about that, like think about some of the movies, some of the movies that are released that are really popular definitely have a lot of adult content in it. You think about movies, I think, for example, like Deadpool. Lots of language in that movie. There may be some nudity in that. There may be alcohol. There may be drug use. Like those are things that Islamic people, according to the Quran, and a lot of other religions too, would not hold on to or not want to embrace. So I think that the Islamic culture is often very fearful of Western things because some of it definitely does have a lot of content that doesn't coincide with their religion. And so things that are coming out of the West are not necessarily really embraced and supported. And then even as our country as a whole, like just the United States has there's this view that, we produce things like that. And so hopefully you can just kind of understand where that's coming from. This is some of that Islamic art. So you can see designs there. Arabic is the official language. This guy won the Nobel Prize for literature in the 80s. So this is kind of interesting, talking about some of the economic issues. And Libya has lots of oil, but then it says that the oil did not reach the great mass of people. So the income from that, which makes me think that someone like their leader, Gaddafi, who is a dictator, he was using that wealth himself. I just recently watched a little bit about, and this is kind of a different area, Saddam Hussein's palaces. So he was the dictator in Iraq. He had something like 20 palaces in Iraq when his people lived in like squalor. really just didn't have a lot, and yet he had 20 palaces. So when you're a dictator of a country, you can kind of you keep that wealth for yourself. So I think the same thing was happening in Libya, that their leader, this Muammar al-Gaddafi, was keeping wealth for himself, and not the people were not getting the money from the economy doing well from oil. So some of the countries have shifted, like Algeria shifted away from, tried to shift its economy away from oil and natural gas. But the government controls some of that, so they don't have a free economy like we would have here. Many North Africans are leaving and going to Europe to find more jobs. It's kind of similar to how, our country attracts a lot of people from Mexico and Central America because wages are higher here. So I think it's a similar type of thing, especially like places like Spain and France. They get a lot of tourism. So there would be a lot of jobs to be had in those places. There's social issues. High population is obviously a concern. Crowding creates poverty and poor health care. It also talks about much of the population is under the age of 14, and many of those people are not necessarily getting educated. This slide kind of talks about that. Libya has the highest literacy rate at 89%. I think the United States is like 97% literate. So this means about 10% of people can't read and write. And if you look, it says in Morocco, 65% of men can read and write. That's not real great. And only 40% of women. Women are often marginalized in a lot of these countries, not receiving equal opportunity. And we can see in some other countries, it's 20%. So women being able to go to, further education into high school wouldn't always be a thing that would be allowed. And then certainly college. These ladies right here look like they probably are in a college classroom, so maybe they're getting a privilege that doesn't, not all the women would have. Political issues have been also at the forefront of North Africa. There's a push for democracy in places, giving more, having free elections and things like that. But then there's also been a kind of an increase in Islamic fundamentalism. And so fundamentalism is kind of what I was saying before, like that fear of Western influence, things that are run contrary to Islam, in the similar way that your parents probably try to shelter you from, content that they don't want you viewing, is similar, I think, to what's happening here. So that return to kind of rejection of Western things, maybe even Western clothing. We look at these women here covering their head. That's still very traditional. So rejecting that would be, not wearing a head covering and going along with those Islamic practices. So there's been a little bit more return, even as like a government, back to those things. And that's going to bring in the Arab Spring, which happened in 2010, 2011. Many of them were pushing for kind of more of a rejection of other Western ideas. But it left many things uncertain. There was a lot of, protesting. Talks in here about the Muslim fundamentalists in Algeria have pushed for change, caused some violence. Many people have died because of that. Anytime you have people of different opinions, it often leads to violence. Little video here about Western Sahara. A lot of people got confused when we did the mapping in class. The Western Sahara is like controlled by Morocco, and they like claim it, but yet like the United Nations doesn't recognize that. So kind of interesting. And then we already talked about this, about the impact of Western culture. And then Coptic Christians worry in Egypt about the influence of Islam because there's kind of a conflict there. So just there's lots of tension in the world and tensions here in North Africa. And I think a lot of that really stems from the fact of European control. Like Africa has just had its share of problems, and it often kind of comes back to the fact that they were controlled for so many years by Europe, probably even more so in Central and South Africa, as we talk about those later on. So a couple of key things to write down here. The Falihin, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, in Egypt are poor farmers. So outside the, in the rural areas. Arabs, Berbers, and Egyptians make up the population of North Africa. Those are the three cultural groups. Many foreign companies are unwilling to invest in Algeria today because of the Algerian government likes to keep tight control over business. So, you don't want to bring in, additional oil companies and things like that if they're so controlling the economy. There's not a free economy that exists. Civil war is a fight between opposing groups for control over a country's government, and there's been a lot of these places that have had civil war. We'll see that theme of civil war a lot throughout Africa. Libya has the fastest rate of urbanization in North Africa. The demand for water could become a problem in North Africa in the future due to its population growth, because as the population grows, you need water. Arabic is the official language of all 5 countries. Fruits and vegetables are sold at the souks. A country with a diversified economy is one that makes money from a variety of resources. And a push for democracy and rising Islamic fundamentalism are especially strong in modern North Africa. So just a little bit about the key things. Make sure you write these things on this slide down in your notes. That would be helpful as we wrap up chapter 9. So these notes will be due very soon. You should have all 3 sections now, about 30 things written down, and that will be worth 30 points. Thank you for watching.